Hi, I'm Duncan Mearding. I am based in Hobart, Tasmania, Australia. I primarily spend most of my time designing and making furniture and lighting. Also enjoy a bit of time spent in nature, and I suppose those two things are quite linked because my work is quite influenced by the natural environment. I'm also vision impaired, and that also influences my lighting and some of my other works because the light coming from the side and a lot of my work, if you walk through a forest canopy, it's similar to that dappled effect of light being pushed through and around objects and forms. Um, when I've done a bunch of adventurous things in nature, and also sometimes not adventurous, sometimes just going out, for fun and relaxation. But there's a few of the different ones that I've done. It usually involves me having to go out with someone often because of my vision impairment. There's some exceptions where I've gone out and where I'm a bit more familiar or where I'm going to do a certain thing, and there's geographical boundaries where I know, like for example, there's certain mountains with certain fairly formed track. I'll go up, and I know I can come. If I just come back down again, I'll come back to civilization. That was an interesting sort of adventure I had for that. But today's thing that I'll sort of talk about is a ride I did with five people, or I was one of the five. Was five of us with disabilities of different types of disabilities, and we rode from the lowest point in Australia, which is Lake Eyre or Katakunda, all the way through to Mount Kosciuszko, Tatangel, and we rode from there through Flinders Ranges up through to Broken Hill. I'll probably miss a few bits and pieces here, but give you the general gist. So we went through the desert sort of area, came out down towards the Riverina, rode through the Riverina area, and then came back up through the Snowy Mountains, up through Dead Horse Gap and Threadbow, and then and made our way up to the top, the highest point in Australia in terms of elevation. And that ride was disability led. It was I was on the bike on a trike actually, with another person with disability. My disability and his. We worked together in conjunction, and it was a bit of a metaphor for the overall ride. So Paul Pritchard was on the front of the bike or the tricycle, and he can only ride recumbent tricycles, and I can only ride on the back of recumbents, or I can ride other bikes, but it's not really that safe for very long distances. But yeah, if I if so we had a very interesting different sort of bike called a recumbent tandem tricycle. It was a good probably it was good, I can't even remember the full length of it, maybe 3.5 meters roughly. But we rode, and we did have an assistance vehicle. We had a backup vehicle with different with supplies and what have you, which made things good, and helped a lot with not having to carry all your water all the way through the desert, for example. And the ride was initiated by Paul, and he engaged a few different people, and the other people involved was Walter Van Prague, and he at the time, I can't remember the precise age, I think he was around 56 or 57, and he has cystic fibrosis, and I think at that stage had about 1/3 lung capacity, and there's a range of different things that he had to deal with on the ride, and it was very eye-opening for myself to sort of see the different things from people's different disabilities and the different challenges. And then there was Conrad von Sproul, and he has rather chronic pain, from an accident, and that's sort of a bit of an ongoing thing that he's had. And then there was Daniel Costa, who was paraplegic, yeah, I think that happened from a donga being dropped, dropped on him on a construction site out in the desert a long time ago, and so he was folded in two, and so he was riding another quite interesting contraption, which was a hand cycle, um, and then there was Paul, who's hemiplegic with an acquired brain injury, which has a range of intersections of challenges with the disability, and then myself with vision impairment. I was less than 5% vision, concentrated around the periphery. Um, but yeah, Paul and I had a bit of our riding was bit of a metaphor, I suppose. Paul would say that I was like he was the steerer and the brake, like he was the control. He was in control of the bike in terms of the steering and stuff, which I couldn't do, and I was the engine or the extra boost. I think that was possibly playing down his strength of his good leg, because he's actually he's extremely fit and strong with the riding, and yeah, it was definitely a bit of a process. We started from Lake Eyre, and that was actually probably some of the harder terrain, because we were having to ride through sand and corrugations to pick on the first day. And we also started the ride, and Paul had an injury. He got his foot caught, and he fell on his back and had some fractured ribs. So we had to sort of start the whole ride with myself and Conrad were riding the recumbent the first day or two, while Paul was trying to recover, and then we sort of went from there, and because there was a bit of a schedule, because we only had a certain amount of time with the support vehicle, because it was a sponsored sort of a vehicle from a third party, and we also all had things to get back to with life as well in general. So we had that, and then on after the first couple of days, we just sort of kept on going through from Lake Eyre to Mari and Lee Creek and all that, and eventually ended up through the Flinders Ranges, and that was one of the highlights. I remember us riding through, and we had emus and kangaroos jumping right in front of us, and we ended up getting all the way through to Wellapanya Pound, and that was quite a spectacular day, because there was just a lot of undulation. And we got the trike going pretty fast with some of that. I think it was definitely a bit of an interesting thing to ride. So like we could get quite good speed on the sealed roads, but it was interesting to start with, going back to the sandy dunes. We went through there, like the getting out of the Lake Eyre area. And I just remember just sort of riding, and it sort of feels like someone's kicking you up the bum quite a bit. And I suppose that would happen with all the bikes. But yeah, you were being sort of thrown around like a sack of potatoes, because you weren't sort of balanced on a seat, or being able to sort of put your feet on the pedals, because you're in a recumbent position. But because of being in that recumbent position, we're able to get the bike going pretty fast, and made some good headway on the sealed days. So it's interesting, going uphill was quite a process later on, but then with the ride itself, we had a bit of a we managed to get it quite fast on the flat, or going downhill, funnily enough. Yeah, so there were different challenges we had throughout the ride. For example, when we got up, we all had to sort of have our routines. We mostly slept on the side of the road, or in campsites in swags. Some nights we'd set up tents, but predominantly we'd just do it with swags. And then every week or so, we'd have a night or two where would be a bit of a rest night, so to speak, where we'd get to sleep in accommodation, and which was quite nice, because you did get quite filthy sleeping in the desert and in the side of the road, and it was a bit of a. And then also when we started getting up to the area near the Snowy Mountains, we started, the tents helped a bit for keeping things warm, but yeah, it was also a nice place to have a bit of a. We were able to sleep in a bunkhouse at one or two of those places near there, especially because we were all pretty wrecked at that point. We the different challenges people had was, you'd have to sort of pack up your gear, get everything ready. Make sure you had enough supplies on your bike, because you'd sometimes get quite full on levels of energy burnt throughout the day. Even if you were, we would always have some sort of lunch or what have you, but in between the breakfast and lunch, or your lunch and your dinner, it would be quite tiring, or also take quite a bit longer than you initially expected. And there was, so I know that, like, we had all those sorts of pack up processes, and having to chuck everything in the troopy and in the trailer, and then on top of that, people had to, they had a range of challenges that they had to sort of deal with as well. And then others also had to do things to keep themselves alive. Like, for example, Walter had to nebulize every morning and every evening for, like, I can't remember the full amount of time, but it was definitely a huge chunk of time that he had to do that, and he would have to make sure all his equipment would have to work as well out in these sort of isolated areas, because if they didn't work, he would have issues between his cystic fibrosis and his diabetes, because he also had diabetes, which from the cystic fibrosis, and that also proved to create issues at certain points where he would have like, we all got low blood sugar, but that would be particularly problematic for someone with diabetes. But yeah, we all sort of worked out ways of doing things, and we did also manage to have the bike managed to get smashed up a bit on the ride. We managed to get it repaired enough for the ride, and then it got we helped get it with the people we borrowed it for. They ended up getting it properly fixed later as well, and we went. We managed to. We also had to do some on the road fixing, which was quite handy to have people like Conrad around, because he had done some solo sailing, and so he was able to sort of do some jerry rigging of things, so to speak. Certain crimps weren't working on some of the brake cables or whatever, and he worked out ways of doing it with little bits of things off the down jackets, for example. Like, so we were sort of having to sort of make do, so to speak, because we had repair kits, but there were certain things where we actually had things happen twice, or we had a hub brake, we had to get a new wheel, we had to get a wheel off one of the other trikes. Luckily we had two trikes, because Paul had another one in case I got knocked out of the equation, or it was actually going to be as a backup bike in general if something went wrong with someone else's. But we ended up having to butcher that bike to fix the trike in the middle of the desert up near Parachuna Gorge, and all that sort of happened at the same time. We were having a film taken of it as well, and we were all kind of wondering what we're doing at the very beginning, I suppose, because it was like a lot of people like a lot of us had never really met each other. I think Paul and I knew each other quite well. We'd known each other for quite a few years. Like, at that point, it was probably we'd known each other for about seven or 8 years, I think, and everyone else, I think, knew each other. Like, I think Paul knew Walter a little bit, but they were from either end of Tasmania, so didn't get to see each other as much. And then Conrad and Dan knew each other quite well. They were good mates, and they were from the Blue Mountains, but we hadn't actually met them until, I think I'd met Dan once before the ride, and then Conrad we met at the ride. And then we had the support crew, and then there was the of Ed, and then Vonna came along a bit later, because we were having some issues with some health stuff with some people, and that was all. It was all quite an amazing sort of adventure, and definitely a bit of an emotional roller coaster at certain points, because you'd be pretty tired, and you just get up and you have to keep riding, and like, I'm not one for I'm not the sort of person that likes to get on a exercise bike and just pedal for training like that. So I actually didn't probably train as much as I probably should have. And because of my vision impairment, can't just jump on a bike and go train that way. But also, I run a small business, so I actually had a project that I had to deliver the night before. I flew out the day before, and something went wrong with that, and so I was actually looking like I wasn't going to get there. So it was just like a classic sort of jumble of different things, and sort of definitely felt the strain of sort of jumping straight into some of the harder territory. And then we then there was all the other stuff because we had to actually drive from Melbourne all the way to Lake Eyre as well, and that was done in a very short period of time. And that was problematic because there were people with different chronic pain from their disabilities, what have you. So yeah, there was just a range of different things, and that sort of ride is hard no matter what. And then there was these different bits and pieces that were sort of thrown in. But yeah, we got from there to the end in about 6 weeks. It was about 2,200 kilometres, I think, roughly. And yeah, it was the last bit we actually had to walk because the snow was too high. So I think we got to Charlotte's Pass or something like that. I can't remember. And then the last bit we had to walk, and so we had to get up at 4 a.m. to walk to try and get up there before it was too. It was before the snow turned too much into ice, and that was quite interesting because we were all quite cycling fit at that point. But then we're like, oh, what's this walking thing? And we're also probably all a bit exhausted as well. So we got to the top, and sadly at that point Dan had a few health issues on the way, and he wasn't able to make it along, and he to the very end. He'd done a lot of the ride, but he was sadly had some issues, and anyway we got to the top of that, and then by a couple of months later, Dan went back to do it, and I think he had some complications with the health issues, and he ended up passing away. We had his partner was helping him to try and as a support vehicle, and trying to finish off the ride. So, but the thing is he was doing that ride as his, he was wanting to do that. It was his choice to do it, and I think that's the really important thing, is that people need to have the opportunity to do adventurous things, and I think a lot of the time people get very caught up with disability and focused on what people can't do, and then rather than thinking sideways about design to make things more accessible for people, or processes, and then disability access isn't all about gradients of ramps. It's also about mentalities, and it's also about attitude. And so our attitude was that we had the right to take those risks, as much as anyone else. And it definitely was sort of terrifying, as it's probably not what was going through my head as we had road trains driving past us on the middle of the Sturt Highway, but it was an opportunity I had, and it was also, I think, really important that we did it as an all disabled team, because a lot of the time there's always this whole sort of paternalism that sometimes happens. It's like, oh, such and such is taking you out, and there was jokes between me and Paul, actually, like when we got to the snow. Paul tongue in cheek said he was taking me to the snow. So he was obviously he said that after we were having a bit of a discussion, because we kind of had fairly interesting conversations about disability access and attitudinal barriers and what have you as we were riding, and that was sort of one of them, about people quote unquote taking you to nature. And I think that's the thing, is if Paul's mentality here was very much to try and create an adventure for or like initiate an adventure with us all as equal partners, and obviously there were different people with different levels of experience. So Paul and others and Walter had much more experienced at that sort of stuff than I was, but it wasn't ever lorded over anyone. It was about, we're all trying to get to the end together, and supporting each other through the different challenges that we had. And I suppose that's where we probably like to see that sort of thing for mentality with life, for society more broadly, that everyone's got challenges, and it shouldn't just be about people with disabilities being seen as a burden or heroes, because that's the kind of current narrative that you see, is that's one or the other. There's nothing in between. That basically, a lot of the disability community do refer to people without disabilities as tabs, because they're temporarily able-bodied, and the temporarily able-bodied, that's one of the constants is life, death, and as you get closer to the other, you get challenges that will potentially make you quote unquote disabled. But we also talk a bit about the disabling effect of barriers within society, and there's the attitudinal ones that I mentioned, but then there are also physical ones, or software ones to be able to get access to information. So like if the park's website, for example, and I'm not saying that it wasn't, I'm just saying, say for example, park's website wasn't accessible to screen readers, I wouldn't be able to access it. I wouldn't be able to get outside, or I wouldn't be able to do things, or say, the signage is not as easy to read for low vision, or if there's, dare I say it, we work out other ways to make things easier to interact with for people that can't read it, can't access information at all, whether it be braille or whether it be working out ways of doing things with technology. Like that's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is like the disabling factors for people to be able to get into nature aren't necessarily the most obvious all the time, and I suppose something that the ride was trying to bring up. It wasn't just about 5 people going and having a good time, or a challenging time as well, but that adventure was definitely something that had was a process, and it was also about like trying to raise awareness within communities as we did it as well, because there were definitely some quite interesting isolated places, and I think a lot of people thought we were quite mad, but we enjoyed it as we went, and yeah, it was we did it from sort of August to September or something, I think, or maybe it was September to October. So we tried to get the shoulder season, so it was the best for all the different weathers and stuff. But I suppose the chief thing that we're sort of talking about on the ride, myself and Paul and others, was about trying to talk about the different structural barriers. When that's where you sort of talk about things called like the social model of disability rather than just the health. So I listed off all the different health things that people had, but the structural barriers are the things that we should try and really talk about in society more broadly, about making things more accessible, and whether it's for getting into nature, because that's clearly got good benefits for everyone's head, or whether it's being able to go to the bank, or get into a government building, or get into a library and getting access to the information within it.